Welcome to This Week in Baseball Player Profiles. As your profile, former Goddard High School and WSU pitcher, Andy Womack. How you doing today?
Doing good. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate you coming in on this cold morning, Saturday morning.
Yeah.
A little bit windy out there. So basically, we're going to go over some questions about your playing career and growing up in baseball, and then you giving some advice to the younger players to hopefully one day get to where you made it.
Yeah.
Okay. What age did you start playing baseball?
Oh, early. I would probably say, T-ball, five years old, in that range. I grew up with two brothers, so we were always doing something. Sports was a big deal, but baseball was obviously one of those. So it wasn't just baseball, right? It was multiple sports. So,
right.
But we just kind of figured out what we liked, and baseball was one of those that I enjoyed playing.
So I know you pitched at WSU. When did you realize that you were just a pitcher for PO?
Probably way too late, honestly. I loved playing center field. It was probably like my first really love of really playing a position. I love the outfield. I love tracking down balls, and I love throwing people out. Hitting, like you were talking to Steve and Brent, recently, and hitting was always my nemesis. But I just loved playing outfield, and so it wasn't until I got to college till I really became a PO. And just kind of focused on it at that point. And one, I didn't want to stand in there while guys were throwing 90 plus. I would rather just throw that at somebody versus the one
right.
seeing it come at me. So I learned pretty quickly that I like having the ball in my hands versus somebody else. So,
Do you think if kids at a certain age start realizing, hey, my future is really on the bump, and they can see it, they should probably transition to that sooner, or should they just continue to try to play dual positions?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I like playing dual positions. One, it allowed me to understand the game differently, right? I understood the situations, knowing, okay, this could happen and this could happen, where the ball is going to go, where to even position people, right? And it gave me a better understanding of the game holistically, and so I enjoyed that. I think kind of PO, I'd probably say late in high school, like maybe early college if somebody's going as a two-way player. But I think do it as long as you can, as long as you're producing at the plate or whatnot. But it did give me a holistic view of the game, right? And where guys where I need to back up, where an outfielder's going to throw it, when somebody's coming around, second. So it gave me those intrinsic things when I became just a PO, because I kind of understood the game better, and even just as like pitching against a hitter, right? And kind of getting in their mind of what they're expecting in the situation and being able to even pitch around that. Right. So it definitely gave me a more holistic view of just not just being a pitcher.
In high school at Goddard, you were a three-sport athlete.
Yeah.
How did you maintain a high level in the sports that you were in and still concentrate your time and have time for baseball?
That's a good question. I think, growing up, I said that we played everything. My brothers and I played everything: soccer, basketball, baseball. I did 1 year of football. We did golf, during the summer. And it was just one of those things I always enjoyed doing, but always had a high level of all of them. Just was, honestly blessed with just being really athletic but it's funny because baseball was kind of my fallback sport. I really liked basketball, and so it kind of was this transition deal where I played soccer because Goddard at that time was terrible at football. So I went and played soccer, and they were good, and we competed and won a state championship in soccer. But I always used that as conditioning for basketball, and then basketball was my sport, and then that kind of transitioned into baseball, and honestly it was really tough to maintain. It was exhausting, but what I learned is from each sport I could carry it into another, right? So I could carry basketball into soccer. I could match up a player because I knew how to defend, and then basketball gave me really good feet for baseball, so I could transition sports really well with certain aspects. That I think honestly probably made me a better all-around player. But it was tough. It was tough to maintain. I remember there was nights where my mom would laugh because I'd get home and my room was a mess and, you know, clothes were everywhere. I was tired and I would literally just like jump from my door to my bed and just sleep. You know, because not only are you just doing sports, but you're maintaining school.
Right.
And I was also involved in choir. I mean, it was just like my parents wanted us to be really well-rounded, and I appreciate it, but it was exhausting. As I look back at it, and I'm like, man, if I were trying to do that today, there was no way. Like, I don't have the energy level that I had then. But I mean, it was fun and had great relationships, but it was tough. Yeah.
So, multi-sport athletes, I like them because it does give them, like you said, something different, helps them with their mobility and stuff like that. Do you think players should play multi-sports if they have the opportunity?
I mean, if they have the opportunity and can handle it, I think so. I think, you know, look, college is a good time to be a one-sport athlete, right? And it was great for me. I developed a lot in college. I think, you know, there's going to be times in our lives we're going to spend way longer in our life not playing sports, not being super active in that. And so, I mean, if you can handle it and do it now, absolutely. I've got 2 nephews right now that are 3-1-6, and you know, they're involved in soccer and basketball and baseball. And they asked me that same question. Hey, when do I just focus on baseball? And I was honest. I was like, man, do the other things really, really good too, because then it'll transition in baseball. Like, you'll be quicker, you'll be more agile, you'll learn, you'll pick up on things quicker, you know, how to set your feet right, how to, you know, do those things. Where in basketball, you have to set your feet. Like, I can't just, you know, run and try to do a jump stop and attempt to not travel, right? So all of those things transition. So I'm probably different than a lot of people in that, just because of my experience. I enjoyed the aspect of playing different sports and just even the competitiveness, right? And the quicker, the speeds. And I think even mentally, like with basketball, it's such a quick game, right? You don't have time to, like, I miss a shot, I don't have time to think about the shot I missed. I've got to get back on defense.
You don't got time to go sit on the bench and think about your last
Yeah, so I think it helped with baseball because, you know, there's times you can really sit and stew over something.
Right, it's a mind game.
It's a mind game, and I think being in some of those faster paced sports, you didn't have time to think about it, actually helped me not think about other stuff. I mean, if you asked, you know, Coach Foltz, he'd probably say that I was more of aloof in mentally than most, because I just didn't let things bug me as much. I was emotional, I was competitive, but you know, the quicker you can forget about something, the better you're going to be for the next pitch, right? Or the next at bat, or whatever that might be.
So in the summer, you played at Sluggers. What was your experience like? Because I know you played under Mark and Steve.
Yeah, it was great. We had some really good teams playing up, and so I remember it was my junior year of high school was when Sluggers was really coming in its own, and made the change over to the academy, and because at the time there wasn't really nothing else, and it was awesome. We were really good. And I think to play for Mark was a special time. I knew Steve for years. He was my pitching coach since I was 12. In between his pro career, he'd come back and we were meeting in South Wichita at some small warehouse when I was 12, and my dad had got his name from somebody else, and so that started my pitching stuff. So I knew Steve from that, and then getting to know Mark, who's such a player's coach, who's such a great teacher of the game. Honestly, just opened up so many doors for me to be able to play. But those teams were stacked. You know, you talked about the decade teams, right?
So bring that up.
2010, I'd put us against just about anybody, and not just locally. I'd put us, you know, even nationally. You look at those teams and the guys that I played with, from, you know, the Travis Banwards, the Tyler Webbers, to Deke Scrams, you know, who come up from Arc City and play, Kyle Touche's, Mike Pelfrey. I mean, the Beatty brothers, or, you know, the list is really long. I'm talking about Millville, and I could keep going on all those guys. We were good.
Really good.
And so to be on a team like that with those type of guys and to play. And again, I wasn't a PO at the point. I'd come and, you know, relieve every once in a while when those guys would start to struggle. clean up their mess as most relievers do. So, but just to be a part of those teams, honestly, was a huge honor. Because those guys were really, really good. And if I miss anybody, I'm sorry. Because those teams were stacked.
It was stacked. I can tell you, putting the teams together was very, very difficult in both eras. And I guess that kind of answers the question for the next one, for the debate. Would you guys be able to take out that 2011 to 2020 class?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. And I think,
Okay.
honestly, just because our depth. I mean, you're talking guys who won and had really great careers professionally.
Right.
Mike Pelfrey and Derek Norris and Logan Watkins, and they're on the younger threshold. There's a lot of guys that are my age who didn't move on, but man, we're grinders. I think of a Marcus Lara, right? So he's 5'8" on a good day, right? With cleats on and he's probably gonna watch this and kill me for that, but he was a competitor. Like, I think a lot of us were just grinders,
right?
That just fought really hard to win and were competitors. But yeah, so Mark, I mean, he was a guy who was really short, threw hard, but had one of the nastiest curveballs. And he would go out there and just be a bulldog on the mound and control a game. And and we were deep like that. And I think that's what would probably set us apart, is just our ability to not give up, to not be down, and really fight, kind of tooth and nail. We all kind of had that, just gritty mentality, that nobody could beat us. It's a little cockiness, but at the same time, it was something that we all kind of carried a chip on our shoulder.
Right.
And so I'd put us up against anybody.
Well, your path to WSU was a little different than most. You didn't come right out of high school. You went to go there. You had stated before the show you went to Tabor first. What was that like, trying to make that jump from Tabor to WSU?
Yeah, I mean, it was a big jump, just because when you're pitching at Tabor, and this is back before Mark got there, so it's a little bit different now. But you're facing teams that might have, kind of like high school, 4 or 5 guys, that could, in a lineup, that could really hurt you. But you go and play at Wichita State, and you've got 9 guys, in a lineup that can all do damage, right? And so the level of that, and I think the level of expectation, right? So I go from a school that can barely win a game to a program that is, a perennial powerhouse. When I was there, we were ranked top 25 every year, top 10 several times, went to 2 super regionals, right? Like, there's one expectation, and it's winning. And so that jump mentally was tough. But most of the guys that were on WSU, I grew up playing with at the time. A lot of Wichita guys, Jared Simon, again, Kyle Touche, Travis Banworth, Tyler Weber. I mean, that list goes on and on of just local guys that I grew up playing with. So that was nice to have, because I'm like, I can compete, because I competed with these guys my whole life. And so that helped. And I think just going from a small NAIA school to just a university was even more of a jump too on the educational side.
Right.
But I was thankful that I became a PO at Tabor and learned how to pitch, and then the transition to Wichita State was really good, and I think just it elevated that a little bit more.
Okay. And you brought up the winning culture there. You got to learn from the winningest Division I pitching coach in history, Brent Chemist.
Yeah.
What was that experience like, learning from him?
It was amazing. I think, growing up and having Steve Linhart as my pitching coach, right? Mechanically, there's probably not a better one in this area from a mechanic standpoint, right? And so I had a really good foundation on the mechanic side. What I needed was the mental side, and that was where Brent was foundational for me, was the ability to learn, just even mental tricks when you're on the mound. Like, when you're struggling and can't find it, how do you step off and untie your shoe and tie it? Just to give yourself a break. but he understood the game really well, and he understood each player differently. This is what I loved about Brent, is he never coached every player the same. He understood what your personality was like. Some guys needed to be jumped on. Like some guys needed, him to scream and yell in his face. And other guys, they just needed a pep talk, right? And I was probably more of the pep talk kind of guy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need you screaming at my face. But that's just how I didn't get motivated. But he was so good at understanding how each guy was motivated. And you don't see that very often. I mean, sometimes we, as coaches, you're kind of going to coach holistically, right? But for him to be able to break down each player and be like, no, I know how Andy ticks, and I'm gonna get that part of it drawn out. And I think just, his ability to not, he's unique because he was never recruiting the guys who could throw 95 plus. And we had guys who could do that, but he found the guys who were really solid mechanically, and then just molded their brain. And you look at the success he had, right? I mean, besides Mike and a few others, there was not a ton of guys who threw upper 90s, but a lot of guys who could control the mound, who could make pitches, and could throw multiple pitches on any count. And I think that was one of the things that I really learned is I can take and on a full count and have the confidence to throw a slider. A lot of guys don't do that.
Right.
The ability to throw inside. Again, a lot of coaches, away, but he was like in, away. And so I learned that, and it takes a little bit of an edge. Like it takes a special type of mental to be able to just throw in all day long on somebody with the confidence to say, I'm going to challenge you, and I'm not afraid of you. And I think those are the things that then elevated my game to another level, to face guys like we did, Buster Posey's and those. I remember Buster Posey my senior year at Florida State, but you can't be afraid of those guys.
Right.
Like, to still challenge him, knowing that there's a chance he may hit it over a scoreboard, but to have the confidence to throw it in. Brent loved those dudes. He loved those guys that had chips on their shoulders and who are just gamers.
What is your favorite moment at WSU if you had one?
Oh man, it's hard to beat, regionals 2007, Arizona, where they brought in, well, and even just the experience when Irvine came in, even though we didn't win that series, but for super regionals. But they're bringing in extra stands into that place, and then our games were always full.
Right.
And we were in the top 5 in the country for attendance. So the atmosphere was always cool. But then when you bring in extra bleachers and stuff in this and it's completely packed and people are cheering, you've got 7,000 plus people in those environments. And we hadn't gotten to a super regional in years. So to make it through that hump. So I remember it was 2007. We had to go beat Arizona twice to go to super regionals. And in the first game, I relieved late in that game, where Schermerhorn ended up hitting a game-winning hit, and we ended up going to the championship game, and Travis Bammer dealt, and we ended up winning it all. And so the dog pile at the end of it is a really fun memory. That's really hard to beat. And then the next year, going to Oklahoma State and doing it on their field with guys like McKeever, who had been told that he had gone to Oklahoma State originally and got cut in the fall in Kid Wichita State. So if a guy like that hit a grand slam against them, like those fun things were really, really neat. So I don't know if I can narrow it down to one.
Those are pretty good.
there's some good ones in there.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
So kind of switching a little bit here, what advice could you give to youth players, and I'm talking about the younger kids, 9 through 13, that area, to those players and those parents?
Stick with it. Honestly, I think that's to the players, stick with it. You're gonna have moments, you're gonna have games where you feel like you walked off the field and it was the greatest game ever, and then you're gonna have a game where you go 0 for 4 and nothing good could happen, right? Well, just stick with it. You know, I mean, and that's a life lesson, right? I mean, it's one of those things like I tell my nephews, like, you can't put everything into one game.
Right.
You know, really understand the consistency aspect. Work on it every day. You know, I've been helping my nephews with pitching lessons, and most of the stuff I give them is not actual throwing. It's like, do this in front of the mirror every day. Do your mechanics every day when nobody's watching. Like, those are the things that I tell them who are that 9 to 13.
Right.
But stick with it. And I think the other thing is for parents, I think, which if I could do this, tell them is don't project your shortcomings on your kid. And I'm not saying that in a negative, but sometimes parents put everything and anything into what their kid should be doing.
Have blinders on.
And blinders on of like, my kid should be, you know, in the pros, and you know, maybe your son is a better soccer player than he is a baseball player.
Right.
Like, let's not just put blinders because, you know, baseball was good for you. Maybe it's not right for them. And I know we're talking baseball, but I think it's let's, as parents, this is what I'm working on with kids myself, is not project what I want for my kid, but to really listen and to encourage them. I think if we as parents, especially those who aren't coaching and are in the stands, your job is not to coach from the bleacher. You're not a bleacher coach, right?
Right.
Like, your job is to be an encourager. And whether they go 4 for 4 or whether they go 0 for 5. And that's one thing I really appreciate about my parents is my dad was very encouraging, very like in my corner, and wasn't that bleacher coach. My mom would get excited. You know, my mom would probably say more than sometimes I'd want her to, but my dad was always encouraging. I remember, just kind of a side note, kind of a fun story, when I first got to Wichita State, he you know, you got the lower blue seats, and you got the break with the cement walls, and you got the green seats, right? Right behind home plate. And I remember my first couple of games pitching, he would pace behind home. Like, he'd pace on that because he was nervous, right? As any dad would be. And I remember after one of the games, I said, "Dad, I love you, and I'm so glad that you're back there cheering me on. But can you go stand on the first base side and watch? Because all I can see is you pacing." And, you know, he was like, "Oh yeah." But he was such an encourager. And he was always somebody that I could go and pick his brain, right? He did this really amazing thing for me growing up. He would write quotes, encouraging quotes on a sticky note, and he'd put it on my bathroom mirror every day. Every day he would do that, just to remind me that, one, I'm proud of you, I believe in you, and if baseball doesn't work out, you know, first and foremost, you're my son, and I'm proud of you regardless of what you do. And so, cool. Honestly, like, my dad, I think, was one of the big motivators for me, because my parents always supported my decisions. Like, when I wanted to jump from Tabor to Wichita State, like, yeah, we're behind you. And so,
well,
what advice could you give to high school kids right now that are in that boat? Because I know, like, at 15, it's a culture shock to parents because tournaments start earlier. Yeah. 16, everybody's calm. 17, they're starting to ramp up again because it's getting closer to that recruiting period. What could you give advice to those players looking for moving on for that recruiting period?
Into the next step.
Man, take it seriously. Don't wait. And I think Mark said it really good in one of your interviews. Like, don't waste your freshman, sophomore year. But know you're going to get a chance. And I think that was really good for me. I remember when I was a freshman at Goddard, I was behind Nick Blasey, who ended up going to Butler County and then Wichita State. And he said the same thing, don't waste these few years, but know your chance is coming. And I think as we get to juniors, for some guys, it may be their first time playing varsity.
Right.
And know that whatever you've been doing your freshman, sophomore year, like, it doesn't just turn on when you're a junior and you're like, oh, I've made it, right? Sometimes our bodies catch up to that, but know that the work you've put in as a freshman and sophomore will lead to you being a junior and senior. And take advantage of every opportunity, whether you play every day or whether you come in as a reliever once every 3 games. Just take advantage of your opportunity, because you don't know if that one opportunity where you have success leads to more opportunities down the road. And I think as you're getting ready to jump in, that's one thing going from high school to college, is you may not be the everyday guy, especially as a freshman coming into a college program. You may not be, but again, take advantage of any opportunity you get and then outwork everybody else. Like, be that guy who stays late. And I remember this was really key for me at Wichita State when I first got there. You know, I had to sit out for a year because I transferred. But I would go and I would be there in the batting cage working on my mechanics late at night, nobody there. And it was one thing that it was my motivation to go and outwork the next guy, because I wanted to play. I wanted to be on the field. And so don't rely on somebody opening a door for you to play. Like, go earn that door.
Right.
And do the things that nobody sees, because when you do have your opportunity, it'll show that you've been working on it.
Some good advice right there. So
Specific thing, whether it be on the mental side, and to me that's probably the biggest part of the game, that you can give to them for advice.
Don't be afraid to make a mistake. You know, sometimes we feel like we have to be really perfect, and what it does is the overemphasis on not making a mistake actually causes you to make a mistake, right? Sometimes, you know, I've heard this say, what you focus on grows, right? So if I focus on making a mistake, like, oh, I got to make this perfect pitch and I got to do this, what happens is you overemphasize that, and it actually leads to potential mistake, right? Whereas, hey, I need to make the best pitch I can in this moment. And you know, and I think, well, once you let it go, but know that you're going to have the confidence to say, I'm going to beat you with my best pitch, and not, man, I can't make a mistake because this guy's really good. Because what happens, we'll focus on that,
right,
and we'll end up making a mistake and throwing one over the middle of the plate, and he hits it 500 feet.
right.
But really, just to take it to the next level and say, I believe in my stuff enough to where my stuff will always beat your best.
Right. Well, that's, again, good advice there too. Who's your favorite Major League Baseball team?
The Texas Rangers.
Texas Rangers.
I know. It's been rough since 2011.
Yeah, and you just lost Corey Kluber too.
Yeah, no, I know. I saw that.
I don't know if it's a good thing or bad thing yet.
Growing up, who was your favorite Major League pitcher?
So he was early on. It was Nolan Ryan.
Okay.
Right. So that's why I'm a Texas Rangers fan. I wore 34. Like, it's hard to really beat him. And again, he was kind of at the end of his career when I got started, but I really liked him. I think it was just his bulldog mentality.
Do you have a pitcher now that you like?
Harrison Buehler. Dodgers. And I think it's because, he's a guy who just gets up there and wings it. And same with like Max Scherzer, probably is somebody that I like, his low 3/4 and just kind of these guys who are like a little bit gunslingers, you know, but just gamers. And those are two guys that I love watching pitch.
Okay.
So outside of baseball and everything growing up and things that you do now, what hobbies do you have?
Oh man. Outside of kids.
Yeah.
So no, I mean, I spend a lot of time with my girls. I'm a girl dad, and then I have a son who's a year and a half, so that takes up quite a bit. But I love golfing. I do like fishing. My family lives on one of those man-made lakes here locally, so we get out and do some wake surfing, and so during the summer we're always on the water. But yeah, really it's doing life with my kids. Yeah, we tried softball for the first time last year.
Yeah.
So it went good. Like, I think again, I haven't.
I know a program you can bring them to.
Well, we went to the tryout, and it was good. I'm kind of in that position, like, hey, if you want to do this, I'm all in. If you don't, that's okay.
Right.
You know, so my oldest, she enjoyed it. My youngest is more, I'm gonna call a free spirit. She's just kind of out there and loves life and is super happy all the time. We tried to get her into soccer this fall, and she was like,
Yeah.
That's too much running.
Yeah.
Like, well,
I hear you.
So yeah, so my kids are my hobby in a sense.
Oh, that's good. That's good. So before we wrap up the show, do you have any additional advice you want to give the players?
I think it might be unique to me. I think for me it is, don't let baseball define you. Let baseball be something you enjoy doing, but don't let it define you. Because someday, potentially baseball may be over. And if we are putting all of our eggs into one basket, if we're putting all of our emotions and mental state into one thing, baseball is going to leave you short all day long. I love the game of baseball. But mentally, I am Andy because of all the experiences I've had in life.
Right.
But baseball was just one beautiful aspect of that. But I had to learn to not let it define me, because what happens is the moment I let it define me and it lets me down, I'm an emotional wreck. I'm not a nice person. You know, I'm not a great addition to society. But the moment I can take the things that I've learned from baseball and apply them to everyday life, that carries you farther than letting baseball to actually define who you are.
Thank you. So again, you know, you gave a lot of
Good advice to the kids and parents about the perspective growing up and trying to get and reach your goals. Because like you said earlier, you didn't come right out of high school and go straight D1.
Yep.
You had to earn it, and that's what it's all about. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for coming on today's show.
Thanks,
I
Tom.
really do.
Appreciate it.
That concludes this week in Baseball Player Profiles with Andy Womack. I want to thank BG Studios for producing the show and today's sponsor, Baxley Strength Training Online. I appreciate everybody watching the show. See you next week.